This is not the same link.
Okay, mate. Hi guys, I'm back. Sorry about that. We just had a few issues with the so-called laptop that ran out of battery. Hopefully people can come on. No one's on yet. So I'll just hop here and see if we get a few people on board. I've got one like, got a couple of people coming on board. Okay, so I'll hopefully apologise for that again. Hopefully we'll get through the next hour okay. I was in the middle, so if you don't mind just retyping your question, because this is now a different feed, I will answer your questions. I'm just watching there. I was touching on the tax stuff before when I cut off, which was a bit of a shame. But it's probably not a bad thing because cut out after about 20 minutes, so we'll save down both clips. But if you want to know more about the Tax Act, please refer to the other clip. But as I was just saying, the people first, because I have got that experience in taxation, certainly has the knowledge to close the tax loopholes, and the money that we collect in tax through closing those tax loopholes can be used to cut income tax. And that's why I'm so confident about our policies and that we can afford to cut income tax, because I know how to make the savings to make that happen. So, so I haven't got any questions yet. Welcome back, guys. Thanks for all the welcome backs. Sorry about the cut in transmission. That's what happens. I used to do this stuff. I used to install software actually back in the 90s, but I don't spend as much time on computers as I used to. Okay, good question there. Ethereal Wings. Do I feel there'll be more vax mandates? Well, some vax mandates are still in effect now. I've still contacted, there's barely a day go by when I'm not contacted by somebody that cannot get a job because they didn't get 2 shots 3 years ago. Can you believe it? So I do fear that vaccine mandates will hang around. Interestingly enough, not that it was a bit of a whitewash, but even Albanese's report into the management of COVID criticised the use of vaccine mandates. So they really, really should go, especially in regards for things like influenza, where, the long-term impact of a vaccine is probably going to do more damage than the actual virus itself. I'm just going to scroll back up. Yeah, so another power solution not discussed publicly, molten salt reactors. Yep, sure. Look, my view with all of those, not small modular reactors, you can send the info, Bill, but can you just tell me why can't you commercialise module molten salt reactors now? What's stopping you? Is there any government legislation stopping you, or is it just a question of getting it commercialised? Because I would have thought if it was cheap and effective, you should be able to commercialise it. Anyway, that's, just happy for you to send some information through to senator.rennick@aph.gov.au on those salt reactors, and I'll see what I can do. But I am curious to know why that can't be commercialised if it's cheap and effective. Thanks, Ronaldo. I appreciate your kind words there. Thank you for that. Thanks, Simon. Look, on the Dodge issue and reforming our bureaucracy, we have got, I actually think our bureaucracy, and I just want to distinguish the word bureaucracy from our public service. So I'm not referring to our frontline workers. What I'm referring to here when I refer to the bureaucracy are those guys in the back room, and not all of them, because there's plenty of good people in the bureaucracy who have even spoken out and lost their jobs, or would like to speak out but are afraid of losing their jobs. And I've spoken to quite a few whistleblowers over the years who have lost their jobs or basically been bullied out of their positions. So, but we do need to reform our bureaucracy, in particular duplications of roles and responsibilities between the state and federal government. We don't need 2 education departments, 2 environment departments, 2 water departments, 2 health departments, 2 tourist departments, and so on and so on. So we need to remove the duplication of roles and responsibilities between state governments. We need to get rid of departments like the multicultural department, the climate change department, and a whole raft of other departments in Canberra that don't do anything. There's a number of roles that need to go. The ambassador for First Nations, the ambassador for climate change, the ambassador for gender equality. All these people fly overseas every year, racking up hundreds of thousands of dollars in travel bills, and they don't really add much in the way of services. And then the other thing I think we need to do is the heads of departments need to get a pay cut. Some of these people are on over $1 million, and we need to cut back the salaries of those backroom bureaucrats, along with means testing their defined benefit scheme right back to what happens in the private sector. Some people have said you can't go back and do that because it's retrospective. It's not retrospective because there's no actual contract in place with these bureaucrats. There was an agreement, but to have a proper contract, you've got to have an offer and an acceptance and terms and conditions of that contract. Now, there has never been an offer by the bureaucrats or the politicians to the Australian people where they said, are you okay with paying ourselves a gold-plated defined benefit scheme when we retire that for many of us will be at a multiple of 5, 6, 7 times what people in the private sector can get if they don't have enough money to retire on. And of course, the people of Australia have never approved that defined benefit scheme. So there has never been an acceptance. So there will be no problems constitutionally getting rid of that, and not the least because the judges are in on it as well. So they can't rule on anything to do with the defined benefit scheme because they would have an inherent conflict of interest. And I'm pretty sure if you put it up in front of a jury, most Australians would vote to get rid of it tomorrow. So, I would love to get the equivalent of a dodge roll in any government to clean out the bureaucrats whatsoever. So thanks for your support there. Look, the power problem we face can be fixed with hydro and battery backup in every home with solar. No, because you can't back up industry with batteries. I do, however, support hydro energy and where we can build dams in high places that, you can then use gravity to power gravity along with, gravity to power electricity, create electricity. I'm all for that. So I know Tasmania uses a lot of hydro energy. So I think that's a great thing where they can use it and use it. Well, I don't know if they need much irrigation in Tasmania, but certainly, there are places in Australia where I would support hydro energy. That's probably the only form of renewable energy I support. I'm not against solar panels on roofs, but just don't tell me that you're going to save the environment by putting solar panels on roofs, or that you're going to, provide a sustainable source of energy for industry. Because our manufacturing industry definitely needs baseload energy, and our retail system needs solar. It does need baseload energy at peak hour because there's millions of people that live in units and they don't have roofs with solar panels. So solar panels won't cover it across whatsoever. Vax mandates are still in place in universities. I'm sorry to hear that, and it's ridiculous that they are. So don't agree with that at all. Angela K, I was wondering why you should say that super should not be mandatory. Well, easy. That's an easy answer. Easy question to answer there, Angela, because it shouldn't be mandatory because superannuation is actually someone's wage, and people are entitled to hold on to their wages. The government never asked the people, never went to a referendum and asked for compulsory superannuation in the first place. Just so you know, New Zealand did back in 1997, and New Zealanders voted against compulsory superannuation 92% to 8%. But the government has no right to tell people what to do with their wages. Now, if people didn't pay taxes that included a pension, then perhaps the government wouldn't have to pay the pension. But the fact of the matter is we were paying taxes for people to go on the pension long before superannuation came in. So the government's double dipping here. They're taxing you, and then they're taking money from you in your superannuation as well. And the reality is superannuation is not achieving its goal. The average balance of people on superannuation is between, for women aged 60 to 64, and if you Google ASFA superannuation statistics, you'll see this. They'll give you a little PDF. And in the bottom left-hand corner, they break up median balances by age group. And for women aged 60 to 64, the median balance is $158,000. For men, it's $212,000. That is way less than what you need to get off the pension, off a full pension of $312,000, and nowhere near the $800,000 you need to get off the pension completely. And it's estimated today that over 50% of retirees are still on a full pension. That's the same percentage or a similar percentage to what was the percentage of people on the full pension back in 1992. So it's not actually achieving anything. But on the other hand, we do have 40% of people that retire today with a mortgage. That's up from 10% in 1992. That's not entirely superannuation's fault, by the way, but it's a false economy because what's happening is people being, as I pointed out on the other podcast, if you can listen to, people are being denied their right to save for a home. If you earn $100,000, you'll pay about, and you have 12% of super taken out of that. Let's say $100,000, you'll pay $20,000 in tax. You'll pay $50,000 just to live today. So you might be left with $30,000. So that 12% of super suddenly becomes almost 50% of your savings. That's going to double the time it takes for you to even save for your home loan and halve the time that you can pay your mortgage off. Now, the best form of retirement, in my view, is to own your own house. And we want people owning their own house, because if you own your own house, that means you're raising your children in a safe and secure environment. And there's nothing like owning your own house to, settle you down. If you own your own house and you get a dog, you're less inclined to go out on the terps on the Friday night. You'll get up, without a hangover Saturday morning. So you don't want to get into the nasty cycle of renting and drinking and renting and drinking. Because when you do rent, you often don't necessarily treat the place you live in. And I know this because I rented for years as well before I bought a house. So I think buying a house is the most important thing you can do, not just for your well-being throughout your working career, but also to provide security in your own retirement. I mean, as I say, it's not the chicken or the egg that comes first, it's the actual nest. And it's very important that people can have their own home. The other thing is superannuation costs over $30 billion a year to administer. So that, no wonder we've got a productivity crisis when we've got whole battalions of financial engineers out there shuffling money around. So that's why I think that we should enable people. Superannuation shouldn't be mandatory, because I think it's more important that people own their own home quicker than it is to get, for many people below the median income, they will never save up enough money to get off the pension anyway. And even if they do get that $158,000 when they retire, most of them will blow it because they've never seen that much money in their life. They'll go and buy a boat. They'll go on an overseas holiday. I've seen it happen when I worked in tax. Okay. Yep. Please look into the fact that most COVID vaccinated people have an electronic MAC address. Okay. I'll see. I'll have a look at that. Yeah. And you have a $20,000 HEX with no degree. Yeah, well, there you go. I mean, I think you probably want to pay that off first because that's going up quite a lot. What are my views on blockchain and the role of XRP in the Australian financial markets? I don't know enough about XRP to comment. My understanding of it is it's used by the banks and things like that. It's a good question because I think we need to distinguish between the technology of blockchain versus the role of cryptocurrencies. And I think we need to, there's the currency aspect and there's the technology aspect. Now, if that technology can, improve the security of payments, I think that's a very good thing. At the same time, we don't want that technology being a stepping stone to a digital ID. But at the end of the day, though, digital currency, regardless of whatever secure technology it may or may not use, is not the solution to the monetary problems we have in this country. The monetary problems we have in this country are because we haven't tied currency, which is a form of credit, to a debit, i.e. real security. So we're trying to solve the fiat issue created by the central bank / central government. Government should, you're not going to fix one fiat problem by creating another fiat problem with cryptocurrencies. Now, I know you might say, but Bitcoin it's limited. You can only mine so much, and I think XRP's got a similar cap on how much you can mine or how much is produced. But the problem is you just create more cryptos, and you'll get to this situation where you have lots and lots of different currencies, and that's the risk. Ultimately, while I'm a small government type of guy, I do believe the role of government is to provide essential services. And to summarise, basically the role of government, the very basic role of government is to provide a military, a taxation system that builds infrastructure, and a monetary system, a currency system. Because if you look at the early history of Australia, we relied on foreign currency. There was a drought in 1805. That foreign currency got repatriated back overseas, and Australia was left bartering. They didn't have a currency, so they started bartering rum. And as many of you know, that didn't go too well. It ended up in the Rum Rebellion. And of course, the colony nearly collapsed. And it wasn't until Lachlan and Macquarie came to Australia in 1810, he introduced the Holy Dollar. And that is where he then used that Holy Dollar to fund the construction of infrastructure, including the Sydney Hospital and Sydney Barracks, which still stand in Macquarie Street today. So my issue in regards to, and we need to just want to distinguish here between the technologies such as blockchain, and that's important. If it can secure transactions and make the transactions safer, that's a great thing. But we've also, currency has to be backed by hard assets. And by hard assets, I mean a wealthy and prosperous, secure, self-reliant nation that can defend itself and produce food for itself and raise children in a healthy and happy lifestyle, that in a stable country. So you can have all the different cryptocurrencies you want, but if your government is collapsing around you, your cryptocurrency isn't going to buy much if they pull out the plug, or you're getting invaded by another country, or there's a civil war or something, and where people are starting to resort to violence. So it's very important that money is managed in a way that inflation doesn't take off. And I can't see how private currencies are going to actually solve that problem. What will prevent inflation is the production of goods and services by maintaining the supply of goods and services. And this is the problem with inflation. Inflation's often looked at through the prism of demand only, when in actual fact, inflation is a relative figure. It is the difference between supply and demand. And what the RBA currently is doing is smashing demand, imposing an austerity measure, an unfair austerity measure on hardworking Australians. It's punishing hardworking Australians through no fault of their own, rather than introducing a productivity measure to increase the supply of goods and services. And that is the key issue when it comes to currency, is to make sure that we supply. And the key point here, this is where you use your currency in a productive manner, is if you set up an infrastructure bank, which is what People First is proposing, you issue infrastructure bonds to the federal and state governments against 7 sovereign assets. And they are dams, power stations, road, rail, ports, airports, and telecommunications. They are the core backbone of any nation. I've probably missed 1 or 2 infrastructure assets there, but let's just stick with the 7. And they will then generate, cheap electricity, cheap water, roads to get your goods to and from the market, ports to get goods in and out of Australia, airports to get in and out of Australia, and of course telecommunications, so we can communicate quickly and easily with each other as well. And notwithstanding Elon Musk has shot that telecommunications, it's I must admit I'm against privatisation of the 90s, except with the exception of Telstra retail services, because Telstra, communication retail is a very fast moving goods. And also I'm not against privatising Qantas, because there's so much competition with airplanes, not the airports, just the actual planes. It's interesting. I think there's only one country in Africa that makes any money out of airline travel, and that's the one country that doesn't have its own airline. It just rents out its airport to other airlines. But Elon Musk has actually done an interesting job with Starlink, where he's actually provided these really low orbiting satellites that is going to be a real boon in regional Australia. So certainly, you've got to give him points for that. So that's my question on blockchain. Many people, good question, great question, because there's no doubt that cryptos are a thing. They're definitely an emerging technology. but we need to distinguish the technology versus the currency, and i.e. the need to use currency to provide goods and services and control inflation versus the threat of Big Brother with the technology that blockchain and these other technologies can provide later on if they're used the wrong way. And that's just because it can be used the wrong way doesn't mean to say we shouldn't use it at all, because that's like water. You can drown in water, but you need water to drink, right? So just because there's risks with technology doesn't mean to say that we shouldn't use it. We just need to be very careful about how it's used. If Trump gets out of WHO, what are the chances Australia will follow? I'd say very little, very small chance that we will get out of the WHO. And look, I'm not against the initial setup of the World Health Organization 70 years ago if it was a question of setting up, clean water supplies and stuff in third world countries. It's when it starts overreaching into government's domestic affairs, which as it did in COVID, that I have a real issue with it. But having said that, I think there's very few places in the world today that should, that shouldn't be able to set up their own health system. I mean, we should have a system now where most economies are strong enough to provide a vibrant health system. And if it's not a vibrant and efficient health system, it's not because the WHO's not going to solve that problem. It's going to be the government structure itself that can't fund infrastructure and in a way that can provide quality hospitals. So and I'll be honest, and some of you guys might disagree with me, I'm not against the initial mandate of the United Nations as a whole, which was to stop warfare. And I think we do need some sort of table where people can come together and negotiate, because Australia, we are an isolated country in the South Pacific. One day we may need other countries to negotiate on our behalf if we are threatened. So as far as the UN's concerned, whilst I don't like the fact that they're butting in to many of our sovereign rights, notwithstanding that the initial UN wasn't set up to do that. The initial UN was set up to stop wars, like World War II. They're not doing a very good job of that, I should add. So I don't necessarily think that we should always get out of every international body from the point of view that if there's going to be an international body, you want to have a voice, you want to have a seat at the table. I think it's very important, and this is one of the risks that if we want to get a minor party to become a major party, we can't be dealing ourselves off the table all the time. We've got to be smart. We've got to negotiate with people. We've got to influence those people by having open relationships with them where we negotiate with each other. So this idea that we get out of everything and we just take our bat and ball and go home, we need to tread very carefully with that. Obviously, Donald Trump can do that because the USA has a lot of influence anyway, but you don't want to necessarily trade yourself out of having influence as a middle power on every aspect. And I say that not just from the point of view of international organisations, but within the political system within Australia as well. Even if the minor parties do merge at the moment, we'll probably get 10 to 15% combined vote on the conservative side of politics, which would be good. But if we want to start climbing up into the 25, 30%, we've got to start negotiating with people in the media, as much as they annoy me, and things like that, so we build trusting relationships and can start to influence outcomes with the decision makers, so that then we can become the decision makers. Salt batteries too. Yep. Thank you, Julie Smoochie. Thanks for your comments there. Can-do reactors. I don't know enough about that, Andrew Paddle, about can-do reactors, but I'm open to them. If they work, like a lot of these things, if they work and they're not banned, then please try and get them commercialized. I don't, if you can, I guess, good luck in getting them commercialized. I don't like this. How do student visas still allowed to work 80 hours a week? Is it 80 hours they're allowed to work? I'm not sure. But is that 80 hours a fortnight? But anyway, no, I agree. Student visas should just be that, student visas. And they've become this racket whereby, in many respects, more money is actually transferred offshore. So, some money comes onshore and goes to the universities, but then a lot of other money through the wages these students earn then go offshore. I just don't think it's in Australia's interest to be running a Ponzi scheme in the university sector when our manufacturing, and we don't have enough builders, we don't have enough tradies. So if we're going, and like I said, our policy is less than 100,000 people, but we should not be importing. But that 100,000 won't include students, by the way. Universities should only be tax free to the extent that they're educating Australian students, and they're taking the mickey there. And this is actually another policy that Australia we have is to abolish the tax exemption on the higher education in regards to foreign students. They shouldn't be allowed to train foreign students. And the other thing is that universities should pick up the tab for HECS debt when people die with an outstanding HECS debt. It shouldn't be picked up by the taxpayer. It should be picked up by the university. And that should curb universities offering degrees in whereby those people, those students, when they graduate, can't get jobs. There's no point, training someone up in a job if they can't get a job, training someone up for a job if they can't then get a job once they graduate, but they end up with a HECS debt, because the only winner out of that's the university. When will the rest of the world? Well, that's a good question there, Des Bell, for our excessive carbon capture. I like your vibe there. Indeed. Well, look, I prefer it they didn't pay us. I just prefer that everyone just stop worrying about carbon, CO2, and just let the phytoplankton in the oceans and the trees and the plants on land deal with CO2 as they have been for, 1 billion years or whatever. Because we know that, and when it rains, you'll see a flourish of greenery after it rains, right? Well, the same thing happens in the ocean when there's, and we saw this, this was reported in the ABC just after the bushfires in December 19, early January 2020. There was a bloom, a phytoplankton bloom in the Southern Ocean, because all that CO2, all that ash that got swept out to the Southern Ocean landed in the ocean, and the phytoplankton took off. So, we have natural stabilizers on planet Earth that deals with increased levels of carbon dioxide. And we should not worry about that. We should be worrying about keeping, controlling cost of living, restoring our energy grid so it's cheap and reliable, lowering immigration, and just making sure that we live in a wealthy and prosperous country and a harmonious country, so that, we can enjoy life. And make sure our children get the same opportunities as our forefathers gave to us. We need better bureaucrats, an exam system to be introduced, and the current ones need to be assessed, merit reintroduced. Absolutely, James. There's an expression, someone made a quote to me very early on when I became a senator, that you fail upwards in Canberra. And that's a real problem, that people do fail upwards, as a matter of fact, in the bureaucracy, and that's not good. I totally agree with that one, James. Government is too big. Absolutely. Lisa, I agree with you there. I agree with you there. And the uni party department, Steve J. Well, look, the problem with the uni parties is that the Labor Party have got crazy ideas and are passionate about those crazy ideas and are very much zealots, them and the Greens. But the problem with the Liberals, I like their ideas and their values, but they're very weak at standing up for those values. And we saw that in COVID, where they all, hid under a desk, shut the country down. I can't believe it was the Liberal Party that did that. And of course, I took a stand and got my head chopped off for it. We need some new party, I think we need to get a minor party up, a new major party that isn't going to be afraid to fight for the values, our great Australian values. But we need to be polished and erudite and professional, and make sure we stay focused on the solutions, because that's one of the problems that we've got, I think, is that we don't focus enough on solutions. We tend to whinge and wail too much and start engaging in personal attacks and that's not good. Most Australians can't stand that stuff, and I don't blame them. It's toxic. And I have to say, whilst in terms of our salaries, we certainly don't earn it in terms of what we achieve. Politicians achieve very little, but I tell you what, the toxicity, it does get to you after a while, I have to admit. Yeah. And now people in government should stop going to Davos. That's something I didn't touch on before, Lisa, is that I will I will lobby to stop international travel for bureaucrats. Other than diplomats, all bureaucrats stay here. Apparently the health department has bureaucrats that live and work in Switzerland full time, and they go and get brainwashed by the WHO or whatever every day. That's a good point. Yeah. So Marty, good question. Liberal and Labor is just extreme left and far left. Rusted on Liberal. Yeah. How do we convince the rusted on Liberal Labor voters to vote differently? That's a good question, and I'll just focus on the Liberal voters. A lot of people in the Liberal Party, former, people I knew quite well, they are constantly unhappy and disappointed by the Liberal Party, yet they won't do anything about it. They keep thinking that they can change the Liberal Party. And I'm telling you, the Liberal Party is controlled by a very small subset of people. They are the careerists in the party. They're from the left. They rely on the party for their income. And then if they don't become politicians, they become lobbyists, right? And this is, they're either staffers in their early 20s or their 20s. They run for pre-selection. Those who win the pre-selection become politicians. Those who don't become lobbyists. And because they rely heavily on they've got no other experience in life, they basically rely on corporations that pay them to then go back and lobby the people they used to work for, or their former colleagues in the Young LNP. I'm glad to say I was never in the Young LNP, and there's certainly People First will never be having a young person's division, because I don't want people spending, their 20s being political hacks. I want them getting out, enjoying life, getting pissed, getting laid, traveling the world, and getting rich. That's the way to do it when you're in your 20s. Have some fun, and when you come back and settle down in your late 20s, early 30s, or whenever, and get your house, maybe not quite paid off, but get a house, get a wife, and settle down, and you've got some children, and you're ready to sort of give back because you've now got so much in your own life, and I'm probably reflecting my own views here, my own life. That's when you become a politician, because then you know that if every time you sell out your values, you're selling out your children. I can assure you, I know my conscience, I won't be selling out my children, because I've had a good life before they came along. So I've got to make sure they've got a good life. So that's how we get rid is to join a good minor party, People First. If you're interested, peoplefirstparty.au, we come up with a good set of policies, and we sell those solutions in a professional and polished manner. We treat people with respect. We build trusting relationships so that we can derive good outcomes for our children, like our parents did for us. David Dimosky, absolutely. Like I said, I didn't read your question before I said what I said. Before you do step into the world of politics, it's very important to make sure that you're happy in your own life and what you've achieved, and so you don't have to sell yourself short. It's important to make sure that you've got stability in your life. I think, because politics, one of the things, I couldn't do this without my family and my wife, because not having them, they're a shield for me in this toxicity, and it is toxic what we do. I hate it, but we've got to do it. So before you run, make sure you've got some good protection around you in a house and a family, because if you do try to do your job properly, you will cop a lot of crap, get a lot of crap thrown at you. You can sit back and be a nameless backbencher and just go to the school fetes and whatever, and not really be attacked. But if that's the case, if you're not really copping flack, then you're not really doing your job. Yeah, just good question, David, and I'd love for all the people on tonight to obviously get involved in politics. By all means, join a party. You can hand out how to vote cards and that, but before you decide to run, make sure you're in the right headspace to do it, and you've got your life in a situation. Your life is where you want it to be, so that you're ready to fight and put everything on the line, because you will have everything thrown at you. Um, uh, where our dividends from these continental commodities? Well, we've got a lot of dividends over the years, and it has been squandered. And it hadn't all gone to Clive Palmer and Gina Reinhart. We've squandered a lot of it on, misplaced bureaucratic waste. We wasted hundreds of billions on COVID. We've probably wasted hundreds of billions on renewables. Another couple of $100 billion on bureaucrats and waste there. So we need to be a lot more efficient, and government needs to be much, much more efficient. Thanks, Trooper. Appreciate that, Trooper Bud. Yep, thanks, Kendo. Vicky, with Duffield, with the Castle Law Bill, that was proposed by the Katter Party at the last state election. That didn't get up. I don't think that's got up. I think the Katters, it's still one of their policies. And a shout out to Robbie Katter, he's a good bloke. So I don't think it's gone anywhere in the Queensland State Parliament. Do we? John, look, I think over time the freedom parties will tend to come together. I'm trying to get a bit of a coalition together for this particular. I've approached a couple of other parties about running on joint tickets and things. One of them turned it down. I'll tell you more about it later on. And another party I'm waiting to hear back on, but I'm certainly talking to most other minor parties. And you're right, we do need to form into one party that can get 10% of the vote. But before that happens, you can still make sure you preference all the minor parties before the major parties. Then preference the Liberals, Labor and the Greens. And especially in the Senate. In the lower house, you'll have to fill out every number on the box on the green ticket. But in the white ticket, you'll get for the Senate, you'll get a white ballot paper, and you can vote above the line. And you've only got to vote 1 to 6 above the line, and we will give you a how to vote card when the ballots are drawn, and where to put your numbers from 1 to 6. Thanks, John. I appreciate your support. That was deliberate, Michelle X. I'm not sure what that was. Thanks, Ross Bow. I'll keep pushing the TGA, by the way. Yes, Demolition Man. Some of the way some of these people carry on, you do wonder. Why was Fauci pardoned? Well, you'll have to ask Joe Biden that, but it's very suspicious. It's very suspicious to pardon someone for crimes he hasn't been charged with. So I suspect he got pardoned because he knew very well what he was doing. Back in January 2017, he actually said that there would be a surprise outbreak in the term of the Trump administration. And how on earth anyone could predict a surprise infectious disease outbreak only makes boggles the mind. It'd be different if a swarm of mosquitoes or something were coming up from Mexico or South America or somewhere you could go. But Fauci needs to be put behind bars, and quite a few of the others that were involved in it, including here in Australia. So which party am I telling people to put second in the upcoming federal election? In Queensland, in the Senate, it's going to be Malcolm Roberts. In New South Wales, it will be Craig Kelly. In Victoria, Bernie Finn. And I don't know. And then obviously the other minor parties, then Labor, Liberal and the Greens. In the lower house, it'll depend on the candidate particularly, but in the main, minor parties, Liberal, Labor, Greens, in that order. But like in terms of, I'll always try and go pick, if there's a good candidate that I think's the outstanding person, I won't be doing it on party. I want the best person to get in. For example, Craig Kelly, I don't really see Craig as a libertarian. I think he was very unlucky. He joined Palmer, and then, there were issues there. And I don't think that's a reflection on Craig. I think it's a reflection on the UAP. Then the same for One Nation. So I think, Craig went very hard very early on those vaccine mandates. He was treated terribly by the Liberal Party, and he was proven right. And he went hard early on the climate stuff too. And he did some really good work on calling out the Bureau before I got into Parliament. I often get a lot of credit for that, but I got some good advice from Craig Kelly there. So if you do live in New South Wales, give him another crack. He deserves it. Yep. Industry needs support. Net zero. Not sure which industry. I'm not sure if you mean renewables there. Yep, that's a good point, Andrew. Wind and solar are just moving emissions geographically. Well said. Okay. International psychoanalytic test complete. It's not just domestic. Good. I'm not quite sure what you mean there, salmon fish, but yeah. We used to have the ability to build anything in Australia. Now we import everything. That's correct, actually. In the early 1970s, manufacturing was 20% of our GDP. We actually developed quite a very good manufacturing base in World War II, and we've allowed that to decline. And that's because of this economic rationalism rubbish and neoliberalism rubbish of the 80s and 90s, where everything got privatised. We opened up the market, let it rip, and 40 years later, we're suffering because of that. We need to bring back a protectionist policy where we protect our country, our culture, our manufacturing industry, our skill set, and we need to make sure that we don't actually have what I call reverse tariffs, whereby our onshore tax rate is higher than our offshore tax rate. So all this rubbish over the years about getting rid of tariffs, we actually didn't get rid of tariffs. We put tariffs on ourselves as a country. And that is unforgivable by our lawmakers and our bureaucrats and our politicians who allowed it to happen. And under People First, we are going to kill those tariffs stone cold dead by putting higher taxes on profits sent offshore than profits retained here. Because if we retain our own profits here, we won't need to actually even use foreign debt, because as a wealthy country with, over 7 million square kilometres of land, we should be able to feed ourselves, produce enough energy. We've got enormous mineral resources as well as agricultural resources. That is the base to not only feed ourselves, but then to start add value. And we do have, despite, the dumbing down of our education sector, we still have a very well-educated population. We just need to get them doing the right skills. There's nothing worse than seeing people graduate from university and end up driving taxis. Okay. Yep, Jerry, we do need a massive clean out of corruption. Yep, very good point there. Dubs 84 puts all the voting power associated with shares into a small group of superannuation funds. Right on you there. And if you hop on my capital market superannuation policy under People First policies, peoplefirstparty.au, you will see that some of our policies is that the superannuation board has to be elected, not selected. And superannuation funds can't vote in AGMs unless they get proxies from their shareholders. Now, they won't get proxies from their shareholders. It's too much work, but that will block them from voting in company AGMs. So great pick up there, Dubs 84. You'd really like our policies. Yep, thanks, another lover. Appreciate that. They have added on 7 years for pensions that have been paid for. I'm not quite sure what you're talking about there, Michelle. Maybe a defined benefit scheme. In Queensland, we still have mostly Australian workers in the service stations, unlike Melbourne, where I'm from. But this is changing, and people are getting under the table payments for double shifts. Oh, okay, right. I didn't know that. Okay, that's interesting. Okay. I paid for my pension, no super back then, and then they stole it. Yep, that could be very well true. And people do pay for a pension through their taxes, and then they're told they've got to give up 12% of their income through super. So they're actually, and eventually the day will come with superannuation. It's about 15 years away when the first generation of people, so I was born in 1970, I started work in 1991. Superannuation came in 1992. So when I retire about 65, 2035, I have the choice of pulling out 45 years of super. I might pay a bit tax if I pull it out as a lump sum, but even if I die, that 45 years of super, as that gets withdrawn and my children get it or inherit it or whatever, as that comes out of super, that means you need 45 people coming in behind me, putting in 1 year of super. So at some point in about 15 years' time, there is going to be massive superannuation withdrawals as people pull out a lifetime of superannuation savings, and then you're not going to have enough people coming in behind putting enough money in. So then superannuation funds are going to be forced to sell their shares. It's going to drive the price of shares down. And there's going to be, in the same way superannuation's been a Ponzi scheme on the way up, as more and more people have had to put more and more money in, it's going to suffer on the way down as all those withdrawals start to kick in. Look, you've got to lobby if you want to remove vax mandates for preschool in New South Wales. You've got to lobby the Labor government. Now there was a health minister. The Labor health minister was on Ben Fordham a couple of months ago, and he seemed very sort of anti. Well, I won't say anti, but I think it's worth writing for the New South Wales health minister to get those mandates lifted. Okay. Is there a viable scenario that could bring back grassroots manufacturing with the current Australian minimum wage rates? Could tariffs help us with China? Okay. So first of all, what we can do to help bring back manufacturing. Number one, get rid of payroll tax. We do that by bringing back stamp duty on share trading and on derivatives, unhedged derivatives, because Howard got rid of that in 2000 when he brought in the GST, or he didn't get rid of it. The state governments did. They should have got rid of payroll tax because 50% of the stock market's traded by foreign-owned high-frequency traders. So let's get rid of payroll tax. That'll make it cheaper to employ people. Let's build up more baseload power stations, coal, uranium, gas, and hydro, and really get cheap energy. Let's do so. For those of you who live in Queensland, you might have heard of Toorong Power Station. That was built by the Joe Bureaucracy National Party because the coal in Toorong near Kingaroy was stranded. They didn't have a railway line to the coast. So they dropped the power station on top of the coal beds, and they basically dig up the coal, tip it into the power station very cheaply. Same for Kogan Creek out at Chinchilla. So we need to start dropping power stations on our natural resources, find some coal beds, uranium beds, drop baseload power stations on it and get super cheap energy. Because if we have cheap energy, get rid of payroll tax and get rid of the double duplication of regulations between state and federal governments, that's a good start before you even need to. And lower company tax rates to the extent that it's only fully funded by increasing offshore tax rates so that we can actually make it more competitive for Australian manufacturing business here. But if anyone wants to shift that profit offshore, they pay an extra 5 or 10 cents. The other thing I'd do is I would actually lower the company tax rate and get rid of franking credits so that you just have a lower, flatter company tax rate. Some people will disagree with me on that, but I do think that companies should pay a little bit extra. There should be a slight amount of double taxation because companies have the ability to choose when to pay dividends and when they don't. As a worker, you earn $100,000, you pay $100 tax on $100,000. As a company, you can delay your payment of dividends. So you have that flexibility, and you're also given limited liability. So limited liability is a cost borne by society. So I don't think that. Now, I don't want to, have a cumulative rate of tax that's too high, but if we can lower the onshore tax rate and increase the offshore tax rate through higher withholding taxes, it'll be much cheaper to compete, and that's how we bring back our manufacturing and that's how we bring back our manufacturing sector. Because we've got everything working against us in this country. We charge employers to employ people, ridiculous. That's ridiculous. 5, 6, 7% payroll tax. We have high energy prices, and we make it very difficult because we have